Hello everyone and welcome to another Endgame episode with Coach B from SHS.com. This is the second part of the video in the bishops of opposite colors where the pawns are separated by 3 or more files. In this video, we will look at the positions where white is able to win. This will include the positions where the pawn on the knight file is further back, positions where we have a rook and a central file pawn separated by 3 files, and in the end, pawns separated by more than 3 files. And this video will conclude the bishops of opposite colors in this series. So let's get started. So next, let's take a look what happens when the knight pawn is not well advanced. So this position, we can see that the knight pawn is on b4. Well, here, white is going to be able to win this game. The winning plan for white is very similar to the previous position. He either needs to break through in the center via the square d4, and if black is going to try to prevent him, he's going to try to outflank him on the side. And black will have a harder time being able to stop both threats. So from here, the correct play will be bishop to e7, just trying to improve the position of the bishop. After this, there's a few tries that black has. He can either retreat the bishop to d7 or to c8, or he can try retreating the king to e6, attacking the bishop. Let's take a look at that option first. After king to e6, white will respond with bishop to d8, king to d5, pawn to b5. After bishop to d7, pawn to b6, bishop to c8, pawn to f5, marching with the other pawn. King to e5, pawn to f6, king to e6, king to d4, and no matter what black plays here, he's going to lose this game. If he blocks the pawn on the b file with bishop to b7, then white will move the king to c5. And now, if the bishop retreats to c8, white can move the king to c6, winning the game. He's going to be able to push the pawn to b7, winning black's bishop and also the game. Coming back, if instead of retreating the bishop to c8, black moves the king here to f7, but after king to d6, white is totally winning. He's going to march with the king to c7, pushing the pawn, winning black's bishop and also the game. Coming back, after pawn to f6, king to e6 and king to d4, we looked at the bishop moving to b7. If instead, black tries king to d6, taking the opposition of the white king, well here, after pawn to f7, the game is lost. Black cannot prevent the pawn from promoting. After king to e6, the pawn will promote and white will win the game. Coming back to this position, and after pawn to b5, we looked at the bishop going to d7. Well, I do want to mention that no better is moving the bishop to c8. This is also not going to work. After bishop to c7, if black moves the king to e6, white is still going to win this game. I'm just going to fast forward through the moves. After white breaks through between the pawns, he's going to be able to win this game. All he has to do is start marching the pawn, and then black is totally lost. Coming back, after bishop to c8, bishop to c7, we looked at king to e6. If black instead tries bishop to d7 here, white can move the pawn to b6. After bishop to c8, pawn to f5. And now white created a wall around the black king. The bishop attacks the squares d6 and e5, while the pawn on f5 attacks the square e6. So the black king cannot go towards that pawn. All he's got is moving the king to c6. And now white is going to penetrate on the side. King to f4, king to d7, king to g5, king to e7, king to g6. After king to f8, pawn to f6, white is totally winning. All that black has is king to g8. After f7, the king is forced on f8, and then bishop to d6 is checkmate. Coming back from the very beginning, after bishop to e7, we looked at king to e6 and we saw that that doesn't work. If instead here black moves the bishop to f5, white will respond with pawn to b5. Again, creating a wall together with the bishop. The pawn on b5 attacks the square c6, while the white bishop attacks the square d6 and c5. All that black has is maybe retreating the bishop, bishop to c8, then bishop to d8. After king to e6, retreating to block white on the side of the board, but now white will penetrate in between the pawns with king to d4. After king to d6, king to e4. And now if black tries bishop to d7, pawn to b6, king to c6, king to e5, and white is totally winning, and he's going to be able to penetrate to the position, supporting the pawn on the f file to march forward to win black's bishop, and then promoting the pawn on the b file. Coming back, if instead of moving the bishop to d7 here, black tries bishop to b7 check, white will move the king to f5, penetrating through the position and playing a similar game, where the king is going to be able to go on the side, supporting the pawn on the f file to march forward, winning black's bishop, and then promoting the pawn on the b file. And coming back from the very beginning, after bishop to e7, we looked at king to e6, we looked at bringing the bishop to f5. We're going to take a look at one more variation. If here instead black is going to move the bishop to d7, after this white will respond with bishop to d8. After king to c4, an excellent move, bishop to a5. Here black can respond with king to d5, still preventing the white king from penetrating in between the pawns. After this, king to f3. If black will try king to e6, trying to prevent white from breaking on the side, this is not going to be successful. I'm just going to fast forward through the moves. And here white was able to break in between the pawns, where he's going to be able to support the pawn on the b file, winning black's bishop, and then coming to promote the pawn on the f file. And coming back to this position, after king to f3, we looked at the king retreating to e6, and that didn't work. If instead black plays differently, let's say bishop to c8, here white will respond with king to g3. After king to e4, bishop to c7, defending the pawn. If the bishop moves to d7, after king to h4, king to f5, and king to h5, white is able to outflank the black king and winning the game as we've seen previously. And coming back, after bishop to c7, if instead of retreating the bishop to d7, white will move the king to f5, here white will respond with king to f3. And now the white king is going to change his route to go in between the pawns. After bishop to b7 check, king to e3, bishop to c6, king to d4, and white is able to penetrate in the center, and the game will continue with the white king supporting the pawn on the b file to win black's bishop, and then promoting the pawn on the f file. Next, we're going to take a look at the positions where the pawns are separated by 3 files, but one is a rook pawn and the other pawn is a pawn on the central file. And the rule is this: central and rook pawns separated by 3 files always win. And the reason for that is that the white king will be able to outflank black's king on the right side of the board, as there is more space there. Trying to go in between the pawns can be stopped by the black king, however he's going to have a hard time preventing white from outflanking him on the right side. So let's take a look and see how the game will play out. In this position it's white to move, so white will move the king to d3, going towards the right side of the board to outflank the black king. After something like king to f4, king to e2. Let's say bishop to b6, just a waiting move, king to f1. Bishop to a7, king to g2. White is going directly to the right side of the board to outflank the black king. And now there's 2 plays that black can try. If he tries to move the king to g4 to take the opposition, blocking the white king, this is not going to work. Here, white can simply march the pawn to e5 and make progress with that pawn. After king to e5, pawn to e6. And now white has improved his position and he's going to be able to win this game. Now I'm just going to fast forward to the continuation. And in this position, there's only 2 tries that black has. If he moves the king backwards to d8, king to d5, king to c7, bishop to b5, king to d8, king to c6, and white has gotten in between the pawns where he's going to be able to easily win this game. And I'm just going to fast forward through the moves. After something like bishop to b8, king to b7, and there's nothing that black can do to stop white from promoting his pawn. Coming back, after king to e5, we looked at retreating king to d8. If here black is going to make a waiting move instead, let's say bishop to b6, white will continue with king to d4, coming towards the pawn on the a file. King to d8, king to c6, bishop to a7. The white king will attack the bishop. After bishop retreats, he's going to be able to push the pawn, winning the bishop, and then winning the game by promoting the pawn on the e file. Coming back to this position, after king to g2, we looked at the black king taking the opposition on g4. If instead black is trying something different, let's say bishop to b6, after king to h3, bishop to f2, trying to block white from outflanking the black king. Well, after this, white can play bishop to b7, and now black is in Zugzwang. He either needs to move the bishop or move the king. If he moves the king to g5, white will improve his position on the bishop. Let's say bishop to c6. After king to f4, bishop to d5. And now if king retreats to g5, white can push the pawn to e5 and then to e6, winning the game as we've seen previously. And if we come back, if black here retreats bishop to e3, now white is able to outflank the black king with king to h4. After something like king to e5, king to h5, king to f6, bishop to b7, let's say bishop to a7, king to h6, bishop to b6, king to h7, and I'm just going to fast forward through the moves to see how white will outflank the black king and be able to win this game. And now after bishop to d5, black needs to keep the bishop on the a7 to g1 diagonal to prevent the pawn on the a file to march forward. Therefore, he's going to have to retreat the king. And after king to e5, white will move the king to f7. And now there's nothing that black can do to prevent white from winning the game. If he's just going to retreat the bishop, let's say bishop to a7, well, after king to e7, white will march towards the pawn on the a file, winning the bishop, and then winning the game by promoting the pawn on the e file. And coming back, if instead of retreating the bishop here to d7, if black is going to try king to d6, white will continue with king to f6. Black is totally lost. All he's got is bishop to d4 check, but after king to f5, the bishop or king will have to move, where white will be able to march with that pawn forward. White needs to improve his position by guarding the pawn on the a file, so he's going to move the bishop to a8. After bishop to d4, bishop to b7, guarding the pawn on the a file, being able to march with the pawn on the e file. So after something like bishop to b6, now since the other pawn is defended, white is ready to march forward with pawn to e5 check. After king to e7, pawn to e6. Bishop to d4, bishop to c8, king to d8, bishop to d7, guarding the pawn on the e file. King to e7, king to e4, bishop to b6, king to d5, and now the white king can switch over to the pawn on the a file. King to d8, king to c6, bishop to a7, king to b7, and now white will be able to win black's bishop and also win the game. So as we've seen in this position, after white is going to be able to outflank the black king, depending on what his opponent plays, he's going to be able to support either the e pawn or the pawn on the a file marching forward. So as you've seen in this video, these positions are not that easy, so I encourage you to practice them against the computer on my website, masterchess.com, to make sure that you fully understand and comprehend this lesson. And in the end, I do want to mention that pawns separated by 4 or more files are easily won. The defending king will have a hard time preventing the opponent from getting in between the pawns and winning the game. Now I'm just going to fast forward to the moves of a possible continuation in this position. So after king to d3, let's say king to e5. Here the pawn will simply march forward on the other side, pawn to g4, and black is going to have a hard time preventing white from going in between the pawns. After something like king to f6, king to e4, king to e6, the pawn can march forward, pawn to g5, king to d6, pawn to g6, retreating the king to e7, bishop to h5. After king to f6, the white king will be able to get in between the pawns and then easily winning the game. And I'm just going to fast forward through the moves. And after white captures the bishop, he's simply going to retreat and help the pawn on the g file to promote. The black king cannot attack the bishop on h7 because the white king can simply let that bishop go. If he does take the bishop, then the black king will not be able to stop the other pawn from promoting. Alright, thank you so much for watching this video, and I encourage you to visit my website, masterchess.com, where you'll be able to practice these positions against the computer. All you have to do is go on my website, masterchess.com, click on Endgame versus Computer, and then opposite color bishops. And then you'll be able to practice these positions against the computer. Alright, thank you, and have a great day.